Hello and welcome to the Editor's Pick a War Elephant podcast, episode 3. I'm your host, Ian.
And I'm Christine.
And we are joined today by Walter. Walter, tell us a little bit about yourself and your place at War Elephant.
Well, thank you for having me on here, Ian and Christine. I've been along with the War Elephant for close to 9 months now, serving as their head of moderation. And offline, I am currently a college student, and I've been a volunteer firefighter EMT for 3 years now. And thanks again for having me.
Of course. And could you share a little bit about what drew you to the firefighter EMT volunteer?
So I didn't know what I was going to do with my life, frankly. My father is an engineer, and he pretty much told me that the default option, if you have no idea what else you're going to do, is to be an engineer. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's very respectable. But it's just sometime I looked at myself and I'm like, man, I should find out how this works, what to do if something breaks or goes bump in the middle of the night. And so I started an EMT class, paid for out of my own pocket. And when I was done with it, I didn't know what I wanted to do still with it. So I ended up joining a volunteer fire department that did EMS calls and did EMS runs. And from there, I transitioned over to the fire side, completed the academy a couple years ago, and have been kicking butt, taking names ever since.
Awesome. That is fantastic to hear. I thoroughly admire and I'm glad you're doing it. We really need a lot of people to do those things in our communities.
Especially if you live in California, so they don't have to use felons.
Well, honestly, everywhere around where I live, nearly every single fire department is run entirely by volunteers.
It was like that in Virginia, too, where I lived. And I think it's good. It gives investment to the community, and I just think it builds community rather than, sort of shuffling it off onto an underclass, which I think is just so destructive in a lot of ways. So we have 3 topics for our podcast again. The first one is kind of a fun one. The USS Kidd flew a Jolly Roger flag recently, and I'm hoping that Walter and Christine can enlighten our viewers as to what exactly was going on, because we all know that the Jolly Roger is a pirate flag, but this is not a pirate vessel.
Walter, why don't you bring us up to speed on this?
Well, thank you, Christine. Of course, it is traditionally a pirate flag, one that shows no allegiance to any nation, and they're going to go yo ho ho, board you, and take all your booty. But no, in fact, this is the USS Kidd, named for the Admiral Kidd, who died on December 7th, 1941 in the Pearl Harbor raid. He was known affectionately as Captain Kidd, after, of course, the famous pirate. And after he died, he was awarded the Congressional Medal of Honor, and the warship which was named after him has started flying the Jolly Roger flag in his memory and in his honor. And many of the hatchways and passageways in the ship are painted in pirate motif and have the Jolly Roger all over.
And this is a great example of the U.S. military having a great sense of humor while still honoring one of its greatest men. Rear Admiral Kidd, of course, was on the bridge of the USS Arizona during the attack on Pearl Harbor, and is one of our Navy's finest heroes. William Kidd, of course, was the pirate that they're alluding to, and Rear Admiral Kidd's nickname was Cap, or Captain, for Captain Kidd. And there's some interesting nautical history. Captain Kidd, of course, was based in New York City. So he goes back to American history as well. So they get kind of a double take on American history with this destroyer when they're flying the Jolly Roger on the USS Kidd. Captain Kidd was executed for piracy, but it was entirely a political maneuver, power play between the Tories and the Whigs. He was supported by the Whigs, and the Tories more or less executed him as they were battling for control. The piracy thing was more or less trumped up on murder charges that weren't very substantiated. When he was brought up to trial, Captain Kidd himself was surprised about the murder charges. And history could have gone very differently if it wasn't for the political power play that went on. All the legends about his having booty stored are pretty much fantasy. So I thought this was a fun story. And it gives you a little excuse. Yar, talk like a pirate. I always like a good naval story. I
actually recently found out that our idea of the pirate accent is from the actor who played Long John Silver, who chose to use his native accent, and it's not necessarily what people who became pirates sounded like. It was just very iconic in the Treasure Island movies.
That is entirely correct. We have a very skewed idea of piracy in our popular culture. And real piracy remains a huge problem. And of course, the Navy
the movie
doesn't...
Captain Phillips was a great look at modern day piracy.
Yes. And of course, the Navy doesn't deal too much with piracy. It's the United States Coast Guard, which is a topic near and dear to my heart as a former Coast Guard auxiliarist.
Oh, absolutely. I've also been involved with and have talked to quite a few Coast Guard members, Coasties. And from what I've heard, they have conducted anti-piracy operations in the Arabian Gulf many years ago. And they can't have a Navy warship go in there and search and seize those vessels. That would be an act of war. No. So they take down the Navy flag, pull up a Coast Guard one. The Coast Guard men, you're now in charge. Go forth, search and seizure, find all those drugs.
And piracy has been an issue with the U.S. military as long as we've been going. If you think about the Marine song, the song From the Halls of Montezuma to the Shores of Tripoli, what they're actually talking about, the shores of Tripoli, was the Barbary Coast pirates. So this has been an issue for a long, long time. But this is just a great nod here to American history. And nobody should be too worried about impending piracy when they see the Jolly Roger on the USS Kidd.
And Walter, you pulled up a couple of flags. Could you tell us a little bit about what they are?
Oh, absolutely. On the topic of historical naval flags, we have the one up there right now is actually the current U.S. Navy Jack. It flies aboard every commissioned Navy vessel with the exception of one, which we'll talk about later. And they actually make that Jack the same size as the normal American flag that they put up on the mainsail as an identifier that, yes, this is a United States vessel. And the second one that I pulled up and asked to show is another historical Navy flag. This was actually the first Navy Jack, which was used from 1775 to 76, before even the Betsy Ross flag was envisioned, and has taken a comeback from 2002 all the way up until the 4th of June, 2019, where it was replaced by the first one. And traditionally, the first Navy Jack has been flown on the longest serving commissioned vessel in the Navy, which right now is the USS Blue Ridge.
Very cool. Did you know that the rattlesnake has been used in United States flags since 1751? It was in recommendation by Benjamin Franklin. He recommended they be used, actually cut up to show the dangers of disunity. And then it was used, recommended in American flags to show the danger of striking a rattlesnake, that a rattlesnake only attacks when striked or threatened and will then defend itself. So rattlesnakes have been used in American flag imagery for a very long time.
Ben Franklin, always with the unconventional animal choices.
Yes.
referring, of course, to his desire for the turkey rather than the bald eagle to be the United States national bird.
Not one of his better moves, let me tell you.
I mean, they're much more delicious than a bald eagle.
They also don't smell as bad.
I hope you don't know what a bald eagle tastes like, sir.
I do
have
not.
many-
That would be very
many
illegal.
federal laws saying no.
But I
You're
have a
making me
very
wonder.
difficult time believing they could be more delicious than a turkey because turkeys are so delicious.
And to be honest, when you see wild turkeys strutting around, they are pretty majestic.
So what's this last flag,
It's
Walter?
true. So this last one actually has the closest connection to piracy. This is the flag of Oliver Hazard Perry, who was a captain during the War of 1812 against the British. And it contains the dying words of his commanding officer and mentor, James Lawrence. Don't give up the ship. And then, of course, his ship promptly was boarded and taken over, and he gave it up. But that flag has been flown historically on Navy vessels, again, during the War of 1812, where we did inscript a few piracy-related endeavors under the table, of course. And nowadays, it is closely related to the USS Niagara, which is Commodore Perry's flagship, which is still sailing, by the way. Of course, they've replaced every part of it at least once, giving it a bit of a philosophical question whether it's the same ship or not.
Well,
But it
I
was still
feel,
something really interesting.
I feel like that could be a great motto for people who are really concerned about the direction that some people want to take the country. If you're concerned about making sure the Constitution remains in effect, that might be your flag.
Agreed. And we here at War Relevant have not given up on the ship. All right. So let's move to our next topic. Thank you to Walter, especially, for doing all that research for us. President Trump and many more members of the government have been diagnosed with COVID-19. We have a list here of a partial list of the people who have been diagnosed as positive. President Trump, First Lady Melania Trump, Hope Hicks, Senior Advisor to the President, Bill Stepien, Trump campaign manager, Chris Christie, former New Jersey governor who has been helping President Trump prepare for the presidential campaign debates, Kellyanne Conway, former White House senior advisor, Ronna McDaniel, RNC committee chairman, Mike Lee, Utah's Republican senator, Tom Tillis, North Carolina's Republican senator. Both of those senators are on the Senate Judiciary Committee, by the way. Ron Johnson, Wisconsin's Republican senator, Nick Luna, Trump's personal attendant, Kayleigh McEnany, Chad Gilmartin, and Carolyn Leavitt, all three the 1, 2, and 3 in the White House press secretary corps. So that's a lot of very high-ranking people in the GOP. There have been a lot of reactions, so I just wanted to get my co-host reaction before we got started on our discussion of what this means and what we should think and do about things like this.
Walter, why don't you go ahead?
Oh, sure. No, of course, on my college campus this week, we've had just a wildfire spread from one person grabbing it at a party in a neighboring college to now 70 people in quarantine over it. So this is really a testament to how the virus spread so quickly and how concerning it should be and how it is for all of us, especially now that it's really taken a bit out of our leaders and out of the senior-most members of the government. I'm glad to hear that Mike Pence has tested negative along with his wife. I hope that they stay negative. And I'm just watching the news, seeing what's coming out each day. I do watch the president's physicians' press briefings, and it just irks me so often to see the reporters or even the general public asking what his vitals are or what his specific lab tests show, as if they know what they actually mean. An adage in emergency medicine is to treat the patient, not the monitor. So the numbers themselves, such as the oxygen saturation, doesn't really show a complete story. And we shouldn't be making harsh decisions and judgments based on that, saying, oh, Trump's going to die, or no, he's okay. We really do need to take this one step at a time.
I think that's a really good point. I know our president has the best medical care in the world available to him. People have been very much freaking out, but his doctors are going to treat him very seriously, regardless of how anyone feels about him. The office of the presidency is taken extremely seriously by the physicians who attend to the president, no matter who holds that office. And I think that's something that people need to keep in mind. I've seen amazing things on Twitter, people attacking, oh, this is the presidential suite at Walter Reed, and look at its decadence. And I'm going, but that's every president has that available to them. They keep that, it's a working facility for the presidential team. And I trust the doctors to do what's best for the president. This is an unconventional president. He does things differently than a lot of people do, but I do believe that the doctors will do the best they can. There's been concern about the Secret Service agents around him, but we do have to remember that several of the Secret Service agents have already had COVID. So I'm sure that they are taking that into consideration with assignment details right now and who they're placing around him. I really wonder about a lot of the concern trolling, a lot of the people who are gloating and passing judgment. And at the same time, it seems to me that there was a lot of careless, reckless behavior as well. And people should take into consideration the need for things like social distancing, for wearing masks and following the best practices, and maybe reevaluate their own personal behaviors rather than sitting around and hyperventilating about what the president was doing. Consider that COVID is still a serious danger to public health. And here I'm speaking as a trained scientist, as a physical chemist, as a person who reads the scientific literature, does peer reviews, and understands that, and has worked in a microbiology lab, that there's really only so much we can do, but we should take sensible precautions. And I know everyone's standards for sensible is different, but the whole not getting together with people and breathing on them closely is probably what got the administration into this pickle in the first place. This is a very virulent disease.
Well, thanks, Christine. And almost doubling back to your earlier point about how he has the best doctors in the world and how it doesn't matter who's really taking care of him. I'm just reminded of famously after Reagan is shot and he's about to go under for surgery, he asks them all, or he tells them all, I really hope you're all Republicans, to which the doctors reply, we're all Republicans today, Mr. President. So I'm almost appreciative also of seeing a bit of that national unity, or national unity. Quite a few people from both sides wishing him well, such as former President Barack Obama and even Joe Biden and his family sending their well wishes.
And the government's not going to fall apart. Some people have been worried, oh, our foreign counterparts are afraid that Ivanka Trump is going to be appointed president. This is ridiculous. This is utterly and completely ridiculous. You know, if the worst happens, we have a constitutional system that names the succession, right? Obviously, if for any reason, and COVID, heart attack, or any reason whatsoever, our president is not able to fulfill their duties, the vice president takes over. If they are not able to fulfill duties, then the Speaker of the House takes over. We have many lines deep in this chain of succession. Any theorizing or extemporizing to any other extent is utterly absurd. And this is beyond silly what I've been seeing on Twitter and in the media, in the newsprint media these past few days. The country is perfectly safe, and people have been wondering, well, who's running the country? Well, Donald Trump is sick, and he needs to reassure the country. Mostly our country runs itself. The bureaucrats run the country. From day-to-day operations,
Well, and local governments do a lot of the work of running the country too. I mean, a lot of the things that I've been really frustrated with are local governments. People blame President Trump for a lot of the things that are really local responsibilities. And
Yes.
ultimately, yes, you can say the buck stops with President Trump, but I don't think President Trump should be going around telling individual governors, or worse, individual mayors, what they should be doing about, COVID-19, because it's different for every location, and those local officials theoretically do know better than President Trump what's best for that location. And I think sometimes that's worked out well, and sometimes it hasn't. But it's still, I would say, really much more on individual governors and mayors, and us, citizens. Wash our hands. When in close proximity, wear your mask. Social distance as much as possible. Just be considerate and be kind, because I think one
Yes.
of the uncountable costs that I was just talking to my parents about today is that we're going to be living with the effects of this disease for decades, not really because of the deaths. There are, of course, many deaths, but we're going to be living with a very damaged economy, and worse, a damaged national psyche. We talked, I think, a couple of weeks ago, or was it last week, about rise in suicides
Yep.
from depression. We were already in a rise in suicides, at least among certain demographics. Just a lot of deaths of despair, drug overdoses, and addiction, which almost always is accompanied by widespread psychic trauma. And this is trauma on a scale that we haven't seen probably since the World Wars.
Yeah.
So be kind to each other. Be kind to those who disagree with you, because they're people, and we want as many people as can to get through this, and not just from avoiding the disease. We want people to get through it because we're a community, we're a nation, and we're even a world, a shared humanity.
And instead of gloating about what happens to your political enemies, and I mean this not just with, in this case, it's a whole bunch of Republicans getting sick, but honestly, as we progress through this illness, there are going to be rashes where a bunch of Democrats get ill too. There will be rashes where libertarians get ill. And in your community, there will be people that you don't like who get ill. Every community, because this will continue progressing through our communities bit by bit by bit. And no matter how vigilant people are, groups of people, clusters of people will get sick, and they will be people who socialize with each other. Some of it will be through workplace clusters. Some of it will be school-related clusters. And some will be family clusters. And you may or may not like them. But when they do, please remember to have compassion on them, because some of it's just bad luck. That nobody can be completely isolated all the time. And no matter how careful you are, somebody will wind up becoming exposed. And when they do, then the people close to them, the people that you do let down your guard with because you can't be up and guarded all the time, those people come into risk, and it is just very virulent all the time. So be kind. Remember people who are isolated, and try not to gloat. Please don't gloat when people who you don't like or don't agree with fall prey. Ian, I think you've gone mute.
You are correct. We're going to move on to our last item, which is Amazon has decided to use their television production arm distributed through the Prime streaming service to create a series of television episodes, and probably series, based on the Lord of the Rings. And everything we know is that it's based on the Second Age, which is called the Akalabeth in the Silmarillion, which is when Sauron creates the One Ring, and the ancestors of Aragorn, and then of course Elrond and his brother Elros and his father, all these characters who are sort of foundational to the history of the movies and the books Lord of the Rings. That's where it all sort of got started, at least directly. Of course, you can go all the way back to the creation and the First Age, but they're focusing on the second age. The news is that in the casting call that they put out, and we'll link this in the show notes, they are advertising and mandating, well, not mandating, but they are indicating heavily that they want extras who are willing to be nude. This is something I've been very concerned about ever since Amazon announced that it was going to be doing a Lord of the Rings series, because ever since Game of Thrones, so HBO has always had a lot of nudity just because they are able to, because they're a paid service, so they're not subject to the FCC's regulations in the same way that your regular network television is. And sex sells, especially to young men. Men of all ages, some women, but mostly men. And so they offer a thing that you can't get in the mainstream as an incentive to subscribe to their content. And whether you think that it's a problem to watch it or not, and I think Christine will give us some very good thoughts on why she, and I would agree with her, think that it probably isn't the best choice to consume sexual nudity. My particular concern is twofold. The first is J.R.R. Tolkien chose to write about very dark matters. There is incest. There are forced marriages and implications of rape in Tolkien's work. But it's always handled in a very moral way. It's never done for titillation. It's always done with a sense of what is right and what is wrong. And there are healthy alternatives presented to these unhealthy relationships. Some examples would be Our Pharazôn and Taramiriel, who I think we're probably going to see in the series because those are the last king and queen of Numenor. And they are first cousins. And Our Pharazôn forces his cousin Taramiriel to marry him so he can consolidate power. So it sounds like something you'd hear in Game of Thrones, but it's never portrayed. You never have those nasty scenes that you get in Game of Thrones. It's always a sense of tragedy and a sense of the dignity of the characters. So I think that desiring, especially extras, to do nudity sounds to me like cheap shock, and just not having the same moral quality that Tolkien brought. And this isn't to say that we're against discussing or portraying sexuality. It's how you choose to do it. And the way Game of Thrones chose to do it was extremely immature and unhealthy.
Ian.
The other thing, before Christine gets started, I wanted to mention is that the Me Too movement was about the abuse of power, particularly by powerful men in Hollywood over young women who don't have a lot of power in Hollywood. And it was often of a behind-the-scenes nature like Harvey Weinstein. But in my view, a lot of actresses come to Hollywood and they don't have a particular desire to be in sex scenes, to be nude. They want to play characters like the characters they loved on TV growing up, They want to be Galadriel or Princess Leia. These are not characters whose sexuality or nudity is their, it's not their big selling point. They're beautiful women, of course, and filmed and costumed to be beautiful, but they're not exploited. Although you could argue that Princess Leia might be exploited a little bit in Return of the Jedi. But I think that there is an enormous amount of pressure from powerful, usually male executives and directors on young, vulnerable, especially extra actresses, but also even lead actresses who want to get to the next step in their career, to do nude scenes because it's seen as being adult and serious. I don't think it's adult or serious. I think it tends to be very immature on the part of the male directors and executives, not on the part of the actresses. This is not an attempt to make them feel lesser. But I do want to make the men who use their power to make men and women, but mostly women, do these things to feel ashamed, because I think that is exactly what the Me Too movement was rightly concerned about. I don't think it's partisan. I think it's just a matter of treating people decently and respectfully. So apologies for the filibuster, but go ahead, Christy.
Oh, I just wanted to say, you're not talking about potential nudity scenes such as in the way that things like Schindler's List used nudity.
Yes, they've mentioned specifically that there would be an intimacy coordinator, and that specifically is basically a sex scene monitor, someone who monitors how people act in sex scenes, so that theoretically this is to prevent Me Too allegations. But as I said, I really think that the whole situation of pressuring young aspiring actresses to be nude in a film or in a television show is the same power dynamic and abuse of power.
It can be, and I'm wondering how much. First, I'm wondering how much difference there will be in this portrayal if they'll go the Game of Thrones route for the shock, the exploitation, eliminating the moral trajectory, which we've seen quite a bit of in Hollywood. If they stay true to Tolkien, if they stay true to his moral vision, we may have very little to be worried about. For example, and I brought up Schindler's List. There was nudity. There was a lot of nude people in Schindler's List. It was not at all titillating. There was exploitative sex portrayed in Schindler's List between a Nazi officer and his Jewish concubine. This was not in the least bit viewed from the viewers watching as something that was acceptable. But you weren't forced to watch it from a voyeur's perspective. It was filmed sensitively.
And what we're talking about here is sort of what we talked about with cuties. There are ways that the camera can be used, and especially lighting, to really highlight anatomy and just draw your eyes to things. And I think that it could be done in a tasteful and respectful manner that allows the actors and actresses to have dignity. I'm just very concerned because Carnival Row, which is another fantasy series that Amazon produced and stars Orlando Bloom, who played Legolas in the original Lord of the Rings trilogy, was rife with just ridiculous amounts of exploitative nudity. And so I'm concerned that this is the same production company. Different showrunners, different producers, of course, but it is the same executives making these calls and sending down dictates to their staff.
And that is disturbing. And there's a long history in Hollywood of doing this. You know, you have movies going back decades in Hollywood that are frankly exploitative of human sexuality and destructive to the actors and actresses who are involved in them. And as you said, it's almost a rite of passage for young actresses to participate in these. I think about, was it Jessica Biel in Seventh Heaven? And the roles that she was encouraged to take. I think that's the actress. In order to shed
you could name almost any actor,
shed that
actress.
Squeaky clean image.
Miley Cyrus did it.
Yes.
Demi Lovato did it.
And
Selena Gomez. They all have done it.
And they all feel like they almost have to in order to shed that Mickey Mouse Club image or young ingenue image and become taken seriously as an actress. And like you said, that's a big part of that Me Too. But it's not just Hollywood. It's all over the place. It's not just Hollywood. And it damages how people look at these relationships between men and women. There's a lot of psychological studies about this. It damages women's self-image to see, and it damages men's image of what women should be like. It destroys capacities for emotional and physical intimacy when they see these kind of bad relationships portrayed, or when they go through these things as actors and actresses. It can harm people's physical and emotional security, and it can make people vulnerable to exploitation and coercion when they see these kinds of relationships as the patterns repeatedly presented in ways that are said, this is good, this is normal, this is healthy. when they clearly aren't. I remember struggling with this in my early teens when I went to movies and saw things that I didn't want to see. I said it's been going on for quite a while. I walked out of the movie eyes wide shut, to the utter embarrassment of my entire party. I wish that I'd walked out of other movies. I wish I'd walked out of Wild Things, because it portrayed sexuality in a very unhealthy manner. And I recognized that. And I didn't want to take it away. And one of the things that we do as conservatives, that we do a big disservice to ourselves and to everyone else, is quite often we shy away from talking about sexuality as a good thing. And it is. Sex is a really good thing. And sexuality is a really good thing. But we get so wound up in talking about the bad that we let other people define us into a corner. And what we're really concerned about, we aren't concerned about people never having fun. We're not concerned about people never enjoying a movie. We're not concerned about people not enjoying other people. We're not concerned about any of that. What we're concerned about is things that destroy people's self-image, destroy their physical and emotional intimacy, harm physical and emotional security, and make them vulnerable to exploitation and coercion. And what Ian is worried about with this movie, and I share his concerns, is they're going to use Tolkien as a vehicle to do all of these things when the original source material just doesn't.
So this is the part where I come in and I make my little confession. I have never seen Lord of the Rings. I've never seen Game of Thrones. I read the first Lord of the Rings book many, many years ago. I did not read the second. And just objectively, from what I've been hearing, what I've been seeing, especially conversing with Ian and Christy before the show, I just don't think that this is going to make a good show. I don't think it's going to be good cinema. If you think about what I consider, or even what the internet considers the greatest movies of all time, it's not tied to the exploitation of people or the big sex story. No. You have compelling characters, good development. You have, your Star Wars, you're the Godfathers, you're the Princess Bride, all with good love stories or love angles tied in intimate moments that don't have to be super sexually exploitive or sexually exploitive at all.
Well, and Tolkien wrote all that. Actually, the Silmarillion has all of that, Walter. It is a fantastic story with war and power struggles and compelling, amazingly compelling, deep characters, and these great relationships. Quite frankly, the success of Game of Thrones is probably why they're bringing this to the cinema. It's not the success of The Lord of the Rings, although the Lord of the Rings movies, you should see them. I know this is not your genre, but
Yes,
I've read all the books. I read all the books as a kid. I've read them all again as an adult. I'll admit, I read all the Game of Thrones books. I tried watching the Game of Thrones TV series, and I gave up. I couldn't take it. But I read all the books.
Couldn't get past the first chapter of Game of Thrones because it starts with a wedding night scene, and I'm just sitting here thinking, this is unnecessary. Why do I need to read this?
I'm not sure why I kept reading, but I've read a lot of stuff that I have a habit when I read books, okay? So I skip sex scenes. I'll admit this. I just do. And this is what
Well, it's like
aggravated
reading
me.
an Ayn Rand novel. You just skip all the speeches and it makes it so short.
Yes, this is true. I'm very good at skipping parts. And this is what irritated me about George R.R. Martin, because I was like, I skipped. Now I have to go back because there was a plot development somewhere in the last 3 pages. What the heck? What the heck? You put a plot development in a sex scene. You've got to be kidding me. Because like in Game of Thrones, there's a scene where a brother and sister, very early on, every Game of Thrones fan in the world knows this, they're having sex And then a child climbs up, observes them. This is very pivotal moment. Early on, the child observes them having sex, and so that they don't get found out having incest, the brother gets up and throws the child out the window. Okay? When I read this book, I had actually skipped the scene. And I'm going, why is this child crippled? I'm lost. I don't understand. Okay, I should have given up on, but I actually read the whole series.
Well, and there is a difference. I'm not, in terms of consumption, it does affect you in terms of those images you create in your head. But no one's being exploited when someone writes a book.
Right, but when somebody films it, people are being
Yes.
exploited. Also, the way that you image things is highly individual as well. And how long you consume it and how much it impacts you can also be moderated. But when people are consuming a quite steady diet of it, it can become damaging, and especially if you aren't also engaging in reflection. When we watch television, we're much more passive about it than when we read books. So we just absorb things. And I'm really concerned about the impact that our media has, both visual and audio, the music that people listen to, on a culture that degrades and encourages abuse of women and children, and also to some extent men.
And self, like the amount
self.
of glorification of substance abuse in our media is
Yes.
ridiculous. It's huge self-destructive behavior.
That's right. Self-destructive behaviors are absolutely terrible, and they lead to a lot of violence in families and are hurting people all over the place. And that's a great point, Ian. And all you really have to do is go visit a local clothesline project and read the stories. If you're not familiar with the Clothesline Project, we'll have a link to this in the bottom after the podcast. And what happens there is survivors of sexual abuse, of domestic violence, of incest and rape, also of sexual orientation violence, will go to a clothesline project and they will make a t-shirt, decorate a t-shirt, however they want to decorate it, to describe their experience as a survivor of the abuse or trauma that they went through. It will be very personal. And sometimes they'll write all about it. Sometimes they will just put pictures on their shirt. Sometimes there isn't a survivor. All too often there isn't a survivor of these situations. And the people who are bereaved because of this kind of violence will put, whether the victim was murdered or took their own life because they couldn't process it, the ones who loved them, who were left behind, will make a shirt to commemorate them. I've got a Yorkshire Terrier here. And they will make a t-shirt to commemorate this. I'm sorry about the barking. And they'll make a t-shirt. And when you go and you read these stories, you really become impacted with how hard these images strike people, how people viewing other people as less than human does so much damage in our society and in our families and in our communities. And you wonder what the things are that encourage that. And the media does a lot, I believe. Our culture does that. And it's one of the things that the left does a good job talking about, but I don't think they have all the answers. And we as conservatives really need to talk about it a lot more.
Yep, and we will be linking these projects as well as the other things we talked about in our show notes. I want to thank my co-hosts, Christine and Walter, and of course, Christine's dog companion.
That was Tubby.
Yeah, and we will see you next week. Thanks for sticking with us, and leave us some comments, send us some emails, join our Discord community or our core community, or follow us on Twitter. We thank you for your patience and have a great evening.
Have a great evening. Thank you very much.
Have a good one.